My name is Allison Gregor. I am part of the San Diego Zoo's Institute for Conservation Research. And today I'm going to be talking kind of a broad introduction about systematic reviews. There's quite a lot of detail in here, so 10 minutes is going to be going through it really quickly, but I'll hopefully point you towards some resources where you can learn a lot more about it. But basically we'll talk about why one would want to do a systematic review, what a systematic review is, and how you go about doing it. So, many people who study animal behavior, you're often focused on a single study organism, either in the lab or in the field, and that study organism may not be a species of conservation concern. But there's still a growing desire to want to contribute to conservation. And you can. You just may not be in that exact context. And so what we learn from our study organisms out in the field or the lab, as we heard about earlier through some of the other talks, that information can be really useful. It might be useful for a closely related species. It might be something that promotes a theory that's useful down the road. But in itself, on its own, one single study is very difficult to actually be used to change policy and conservation practice. And so conservation managers, just like the rest of us academics, deal with a problem that there are too many studies out there to actually go through and read. And to actually make our research count, we need to help get that information to managers in an easily digestible format and in a way that's accessible. And part of the issue is that for a lot of managers, time and resources are of real constraints, especially when dealing with insight that might be coming from parallel fields like animal behavior. So we have to do the job of bringing the research to them and doing it in a way that's actually going to be publicly available, not behind a paywall, and something that is as unbiased as possible. So that brings us to systematic reviews and systematic maps. Why would we do those instead of a traditional review? Now, traditional reviews can be very good for academic purposes, but if we're dealing with a topic that has had conflicting results in the past, or a topic that may have an outcome which would require a lot of policy input or a lot of resources, we really want to make sure that we're giving the best evidence possible. So, to get around those things, often traditional reviews don't just do the job, because traditional reviews can be biased. They're not all biased, they're not all wrong, but there are ways that bias can slip in. So traditional reviews suffer from publication bias at times. And that is just simply the unfortunate truth of a lot of academic journals prefer to publish results instead of null results. And so that means the pool of studies that we're using for our evidence can be biased. Then within the process of actually selecting from that pool, we can have biases in terms of the search terms that we use, whether there's just a popular term that we're missing or whether we're missing a piece of jargon. We can also be biased in the different databases that we look at, and the institutional access that we use to get into those databases will really vary and determine what papers you're going to get out for your review. And then beyond that, once you have your selection of studies, we can fall prey to analytical biases. Now, meta-analyses are some tools that one can use to try and do this in a stricter way. However, it is also often times down to subjective decisions at the end. And so unless that is conveyed and decided ahead of time, there can be personal biases that slip in. Of maybe I'll look into this effect, maybe I'll look into that one, late in the game when you actually have the data in front of you. Additionally, when we come up with traditional reviews, sometimes we may be coming from an academic perspective. And what we think is the most interesting, even if we're looking for an application, may not use the right jargon and it may not take the right approach, even in how we formulate our question, to be something that's going to be applicable to a manager who might want to use it. So for that, we can have, even if we're trying for an applied question, we may not have an applied outcome. So this is a similar problem that other fields have faced. The field of medicine had a similar issue as well, and they have turned to systematic reviews to help revolutionize evidence-based medicine. And so there are a number of groups out there trying to do that with environmental evidence, to make it more accessible, to make it more transparent, and to make it less biased, so that we can have more evidence-based outcomes. So, what is a systematic review and systematic map, and how do they differ from a traditional review? So, the first step there is to formulate a question. And I mentioned having applied input, and in this case, we count those as stakeholders. So stakeholders can be land managers, they can be federal agencies, they can be other academics that may have a different perspective on the same topic. But actually starting from the very beginning, before we go through any of the process, is to figure out what is the most important question that we can be answering with the topic we want to research. Then a systematic review actually goes through a peer review process at the methods stage. So in systematic reviews, you call it a protocol, but this is actually a document that explains every step of your methods along the way. And this is peer reviewed and published in an open access format before you even start collecting all of your research. Now, when you do that, writing that protocol document, you do want to run some little pilot searches so you have an idea of what your output will look like, but you need to think through every stage from what metadata you want to collect on your studies and how you want to structure the review. And there are a number of resources to help write a protocol document and think about the things that you need at that stage. One other way that traditional reviews differ from systematic reviews and maps is that you also search beyond the academic literature. You look into gray literature sources. Now, when we're talking about conservation outcomes, oftentimes the evidence is not academically published. IUCN species reports and federal agency reports actually have a lot of good science in there at times, but it isn't always peer reviewed. And so by ignoring the gray literature, we may actually be missing out on a lot of the evidence that's out there for a given topic, especially evidence when things don't go well. You then, when you have gone through your search engines and you have all your studies, you screen them for eligibility. Now, this is similar to a traditional review. You may have a list of criteria that you want to keep studies in or out. At this stage in the process, you can stop there if you want to create what's called a systematic map. And a systematic map basically is a format for being able to say, this is the evidence that's out there, and this is where we may have gaps in the literature. And having systematic maps can be a really useful tool for helping direct future research and resources. Just to give a little example, this is what an output of a systematic map can look like. So this is a systematic map that looked at the effect of different roadside management techniques on flora and fauna in the area there. And basically, it just collected all the studies that someone could look at in future and pick up and say, there's not been much research in my area, or maybe actually I see some patterns here that I want to pursue in future for designing my own studies. So that's still a very useful output. If the intention is to conduct a full-fledged review, you then critically appraise the studies. And this is how you deal with the fact that some academic literature may be better than others, and some gray literature may be better than others. And there are cases where the academic literature may not be as robust as something you find in the gray literature, but doing this allows you to evaluate them all based on the same criteria. And then you can extract the data and synthesize this. And now this is something behavioral ecologists are really good at. That's a traditional meta-analysis. It's just the steps that you've gotten to get there are a bit more robust, transparent, and verifiable. You then go through and publish your systematic review in the same way you would a traditional review. It would be peer-reviewed, except then you want to make sure you communicate, again, with your stakeholders to make sure that they can engage in the output that you've come up with. So how does one go about doing this? I've put up a plug here for the Collaboration for Environmental Evidence because they have specifically taken the format of systematic reviews that are used in medicine to actually be used for environmental evidence, and that involves all areas of conservation. And they have a lot of resources there on how to actually do systematic reviews, and they offer a platform for publishing reviews, both the protocol documents and the maps and reviews themselves. They also have come up with these reporting standards. They call them ROSES. It's a really simple document that goes through step by step everything you need in a review. You also, let's see if that goes back. You also want to engage with stakeholders. Misty gave a great talk earlier about how we find different people to be involved in the research, and this is absolutely key before you start a systematic review to make sure that the output that you're going to create is maximally useful for the people that need it. I've also put a couple of little online resources here. Predictor.org is a place where you can go to estimate the time it may take to run a systematic review. And then Kadima is an open source software that actually runs you through the process of collecting studies, critically appraising them, and helps you really easily do intercoder reliability when you're screening studies. So overall, as a summary for a lot of this, systematic reviews are a lot of work, but your output is going to be the best it possibly can be. There might be some questions that behaviorists are trying to answer that may not be appropriate for a systematic review, but there may be still some elements of the systematic review process that can be used to make the research outcomes more robust. So I encourage you all to learn a bit more about it if you're interested, but it is ultimately a tool that we can use to help get our research in the hands of the people who will actually use it. So with that, I will say thank you.